Twitter Files Brazil 2 has come out today. We're going to talk about what has already happened, what's new now, some of what politicians are saying, and more.
Yeah, it is actually very crazy. I mean, I think there's no question that there's an abuse of judicial power here to an extreme degree. The people of Brazil ought to know that there is an abuse of judicial power to an extreme degree that we've not seen in any country on earth. I have never seen anything of this magnitude. Um, so it's insane. And the elected representatives of the people of Brazil, that's who should be in charge. Um, and the judiciary is there to in, uh, execute upon the law, but not to make the law. But they are making the law, um, and I think it's an outrage. People should be extremely upset. Um, this has got to stop.
So, a quick recap on what has happened. Brazil Twitter Files. We had Elon Musk come out and say that he is going to reinstate journalists on Twitter, in particular, Brazilian journalists. Elon Musk was then threatened that he'd be sanctioned if he refused to comply with censorship. He said no, that it's unconstitutional, essentially, and violating the rights of Brazilians. Then we saw Elon targeted by this judge here, this Brazilian judge, Alexandre de Moraes, who's at the heart of this case. And he has a history of battling free speech for a while. He's even ordered police to arrest people whose speech he deems inappropriate. And they also threatened to take Starlink, to cancel contracts with Starlink in Brazil, which this is used in rural areas where they don't have the infrastructure for a fast internet. It's providing internet to schools for people in Brazil and more. So they're saying we're going to get rid of that. Elon Musk came back and said, I'll provide it for free. This is a fundamental right. I think that's his kind of position on that. And that's just me speaking. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems that way. We go on here. You have a lot of politicians coming out in Brazil speaking out against the censorship and trying to get people to stand up for their rights of free speech. You have this history. There's a leftist groups pushing the government to fine Elon Musk for $200 million, and claiming that he's threatened their democracy by allowing free speech, as ironic as that sounds. Yes, they actually have precedents, and they operate through NGOs. F1 pilot, and he was sued by an NGO for comments that he made that offended people. He was sued for the equivalent of $1 million US. Just a little bit less than $1 million US. So that's the situation right now. Aaron Cariati, sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. He's a physician, psychiatry, a writer for the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, etc. He went to Twitter and said this: Brazil has fallen. They are freezing the assets and bank accounts of journalists and confiscating their passports. Pay attention. Coming to a Western nation near you. And that is quite alarming, and I think he's right. We see a lot of very close similarities between the U.S. and what's happening in Brazil right now, and even other countries and prior dictatorships and whatnot. It's wildly concerning, which is important that we share information and talk freely and maintain our constitution and our rights, not just in the U.S., but in Brazil and everywhere else. It's wildly important. Brazil has fallen, he says. My gosh. All right, and we're going to get into some of what Eduardo Girão said today, and he's an independent senator from Brazil. He was on Mario Nawfal's Space, and he had a lot to say about the history of this and what's going on. So we're going to talk about that. But first, we're going to get into Twitter Files Part 2, Brazil, in just a moment here. Here's the short version. Eli Vieira summarized the Twitter Files 2 Brazil. Brazil Twitter Files Part 2. In simple terms here, I'm going to go ahead and read this. Quote, in summary, quote, Brazil's biggest YouTuber, Felipe Neto, who was once anti-Lula, has made a pro-Lula turn and helped Lula get elected last year for his third term. He joined a group of the Human Rights Ministry that critics call a Ministry of Truth. because it's hell-bent on removing quote-unquote fake news and quote-unquote hate speech. Lula's government, together with de Moraes' Supreme Court, has now about 3 different ministries of truth. It goes on, quote, "It seems Felipe Neto had privileged access to some important people inside Twitter to the point that, after complaining a lot that a tweet wouldn't be deleted, the head of public policy came to Yoel Roth to make an appeal for the tweet's deletion. The tweet was made by journalist Alan Dos Santos, who is now in exile in the USA. Later, Lula's government tried to convince the US government to send Dos Santos back to Brazil. But when FBI officials saw a video by Dos Santos at the Justice Ministry during a visit, they said, quote, 'Those are just words,' unquote, not crimes, like the Brazilian officials insisted. Because the USA has a First Amendment, Brazil doesn't." Yoel Roth was worried that, because Dos Santos had achieved a small court victory against censorship on YouTube, this could happen again at Twitter. So he was managing the case carefully, trying to appear as though Twitter wasn't censoring Dos Santos when Roth comments on the tweets Felipe Neto didn't like was still up. He claims that blood clots and myocarditis after COVID vaccines are only narratives. Now we know that this was the narrative. Felipe Neto didn't like Twitter Files Brazil at all and made some harsh comments against you. And that is the summary here. Thank you to Eli Vieira for putting that out. The full article, of course, is available if you want to read it in detail on x.com. So there's the summary there. Holy moly. Let's go to this post here by Elon Musk. Elon Musk says X respects the laws of Brazil and all countries in which we operate. When given an order to break the law, we must refuse. And this was April 10th at 10:35 a.m. Pacific time, so this is today, Elon Musk's position in response to X Global Government Affairs tweet that read, "At the heart of this debate is our belief that some of the court's orders we have received are not in line with the Marco Civil Law or the Brazilian Federal Constitution." And they go into greater detail as to why. And some people have even dug into their constitution and provided more information on X. If you want to dig into it, I think Elon Musk is onto it, and I'm pretty sure he's probably had lawyers look at it prior to making these decisions. So Elon Musk is sticking to his conviction there. Here we have Nicolas Ferreira. He is in the department most voted federal representative in Brazil and in the history of Minas Gerais. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing this stuff. He is a very popular federal representative. He went to Twitter and said this today, quote, "After starting to ask for more information about Elon Musk's allegations, the Brazilian Supreme Court has just opened an investigation against me because I said Lula is corrupt. The simple investigation of a fact like this already demonstrates how much freedom of speech is threatened in Brazil, including what's happening to me, the most voted deputy in the country, who has parliamentary immunity under the Constitution. What about the simple Brazilian citizens who cannot refer to a politician convicted in 3 instances as a corrupt? Today it's me, tomorrow it's going to be you." Of course, he's talking about Lula, who's been convicted and released, which we'll talk about that here in a moment. Onward here, we come to Eduardo Girão. He is an independent senator elected by over 1 million residents. He's Christian, pro-life, etc. He's against abortion. He's against drugs. He's against gambling. And he was on Mario's space today. He's actually, I think they're having a space right now regarding this. And he said a lot of interesting things. So he said this, and I'm paraphrasing here. "It's at a level that the Gestapo would be jealous. They are basically charging people for liking or sending emojis on messages that are not even made by them. But just by liking a message, you might be indicted. You might be indicted if you're a person of relevance. They are monitoring social media. This is why we need a totally independent channel like X, because all other channels of communication, Meta, Google, everywhere, where they've acquiesced to their demands." He said, this is what's going on in Brazil, confirming the censorship. He goes on and talks about Brazilian Supreme Court investigation, talking about the investigations opened up against Chamber of Deputies Nicolas Ferreira after inquiring about the Elon Musk case, more apparent corruption there. And he mentioned many concerns that he has. He said the world is starting to see that in Brazil there's no democracy. Journalists are having their passports confiscated. We have journalists with frozen assets and bank accounts. Journalists with social media blocked through judicial sentences and decrees. He said that a senator of the republic with social media blocked and censorship. He says that today Brazilians are sad and they're afraid to express their opinions on social media. And he continues on to talk about how long this has been going on in Brazil, and he said for about 6 years. He says that the government, if you will, he says they've been growing with their legislative power. They're overreaching on legislation. They've done a lot of overreaching when Bolsonaro was in office, and now they're reaching over the legislature. He says it's becoming an executive, legislative, judiciary committee concentrating all the powers. He said that Lula himself has absolutely no power, and he gets his power by purchasing it from basically the people in the middle. And he talks about the corruption there and that the system is completely broken and being taken advantage of, twisted up, and powers being concentrated instead of being divided. He mentions Lula's conviction and release. He claimed that Lula was convicted of money laundering and obstruction of justice, jailed, and then released by a Supreme Court order. His convictions were removed, and he was allowed to run for president again. Just a little history there. True story. He says it's a serious situation in Brazil, and that with the electoral and Supreme Courts not respecting the branches of government, and everything being highly politicized, it's a threat, basically. He calls for the impeachment of judges, including the Chief Judge Luis Romosa. He has concerns about judges pushing for drug legalization in Brazil, as well as abortion. He talks about, most 80% of our people don't want abortion, but they're pushing for this kind of thing, as well as the drugs. He doesn't like that stuff. He says that needs to go. We need to impeach everybody that is not following the Constitution, and that's corrupt, basically. And I'm paraphrasing here. That's my take on it, how I understand it. He says that international support is greatly needed right now. He said Brazil needs international support to restore democracy, urgent appeal for respect for the Constitution and the rule of law. He requests international support to awaken other parliamentarians and congressmen. He basically says they need international support to liberate Brazil and uphold their constitution. A lot of interesting statements made and a little bit of history there by Eduardo Girão here. Onward. Let's see what else we got here. Here's Luis Felipe. He is a federal deputy, a political scientist, a writer, and an executive. And he made a post saying this on X today. He said, here's the soap opera summary. First was the release of the Twitter files, which exposed illegal interference with Twitter. Then came the Twitter owner's rejection of these illegalities. The left, the government, and its media created the version that is a foreign attack against Brazil, and instead of defending legality, they call for more interference and censorship. Yep, essentially, that is the nutshell of it. So that's the quick update. As quick as I could make it as. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back again here shortly with more on what's going on. Thank you for tuning in. Take care.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.